Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar of the Transform Finance Investor Network on Fair Chance to Work, Employment Pathways for Excluded Individuals. My name is Andrea Armeni. I am the Executive Director of Transform Finance, and I'm delighted to welcome you today. We'll be having a very quick presentation and catch up on a couple of Investor Network items. And then we will turn it over to our two presenters, Jonathan Halpern and Mike Brady from Greystone. Very excited to have both of them here to tell us a bit about their work, the history of Greystone, the open hiring model, and the new initiatives that they have coming up of special relevance for some of the members of our investor network that are looking at an inclusive hiring opportunities. Quick couple of updates on our end. I'm very excited to welcome Eric Horvath, who just joined us this week at Transform Finance as the Program Manager for Community and Social Justice Partnerships. While his work will be focused on more on the activist, community, social justice practitioner end of the Transform Finance agenda, he will also be interfacing with the investor community to both lift up some of the voices from the activist side of our work, but also as a way to understand better what your needs might be in terms of how you're trying to reconcile your investment practice with social change and social justice. His email is there, eric@transformfinance.org. I encourage you to reach out to him. Give him a welcome, tell him what's on your mind, and we'll find him to be a great resource for you all. I also wanted to mention, in terms of our upcoming in-person events, which are always pretty exciting, that we will be hosting a gathering at the Latin American Impact Investor Forum in Mérida, in Mexico, February 28th and March 1st. For our investors from the LATAM region, we would encourage you to join us. It would be great to see you there and to have you there as always. And that will be Mérida, Mexico, February 28th, March 1st. I'll be presenting there. Aner Benami from Candide will also be presenting, and you'll see a lot of the familiar faces there. And then we could not really do a webinar this week, I suppose, without at least a quick mention of Blackrock's Larry Fink letter. Many of you might have already seen this. So Larry Fink, the CEO of Blackrock, biggest asset manager in the world, came out last week with his annual letter in which he stated that society is demanding that companies, public and private, serve a social purpose. Right? That companies must make a positive contribution to society, that he will be encouraging the companies in the BlackRock portfolio to do so, and interestingly says companies must benefit all of their stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and the communities in which they operate. You won't be surprised to see that this is quite a radical departure from the traditional theory of shareholder primacy. Now, this has been applauded, of course, as an interesting development in terms just of the size of the trillions of assets that ostensibly will be influenced by this. There have also been words of caution because in the past, BlackRock's grant statements have not necessarily been followed up with activity. That was the case for their statement a few years back around excessive share buybacks, where BlackRock did not take voting decisions that were aligned with Larry Fink's statements. It has slightly changed over time with respect to their climate change votes. They have been getting to be a little bit more aligned. But I want to look at this again, especially with respect to the network membership, not in terms of is this good or is this bad in the abstract, but is there anything that we could do to really support this thesis, right? How can we make sure that BlackRock is held accountable for what it says it does? How can they operationalize what they're doing? In a sense, even though we are the very small potatoes, we do have a lot more experience in some of these implementation ideas around how to include other stakeholders, how to have a multi-pronged approach to value creation that hopefully we'll find a way to communicate to them. Again, if you're interested in the theory of change around how we can influence an actor such as Blackrock, please do reach out. It will be exciting to find a way to do so. Another quick announcement, we will have a webinar with our colleagues at the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, to discuss the recent issue brief on responsible exits and how to structure them into deals. We'll look at the work that they have done, a couple of the case studies, as well as some of the next edge in responsible exits in terms of how to bake the mission into the enterprise in such a way that it is not jeopardized by a potential exit. With that, let's turn over to the content of today's webinar. Really, I view it broadly as the idea of the need to create fair opportunities for work, and then we will zoom in on the work that Greystone is doing in this area. And we can think of it as the usual approach that we take in terms of who is getting left behind, right? We are in a period of economic recovery. However, if you look around, probably you don't feel like that recovery is being spread out evenly across all members of our society. So how can we ensure that the recovery that is happening actually flows in particular to those that have historically been excluded and have had fewer opportunities in an economic sense, but also in a social sense. And it ties into other areas of our prior conversations around the wealth gap, the racial justice angle of opportunities to work, especially opportunities around quality jobs. There is this fundamental inconsistency in the lack of employment opportunities with that approach that, in Anera's words again, who wins and who loses in the economy through the investments that we make. More broadly, we think of it in the context of the role that investors can play in creating a fair future for work. As some of you know, we are working with Tonzi Whelan at NYU Stern, the Center for Sustainable Business, on how investors can and should be thinking about the changing dynamic of labor, in particular in a world of growing wealth inequality. Again, Oxfam came out with its report this year that had an interesting twist compared to prior issues where they put just the stark difference in wealth held by the top 42 people in the world versus the bottom half in terms of wealth holdings of the world's population. They actually were looking at it from a progress perspective, looking at just how much more that gap has grown over the year, and the figures are fairly disheartening. So there is a certain urgency to this. So how does this fit from an investor's perspective, the issue of
what's in your email about it?
At work?
Okay.
If you could all please mute yourselves, we'll...
Can you mute yourself?
Thank you. So this intersects with several areas that we've been looking at, as we're saying. Criminal justice reform. Some of you might remember that convening at the Rockefeller Family Fund about a year ago, where we're looking at the intersection of criminal justice, pathways of reentry, and opportunities for jobs. Issue of racial justice has been one of the fundamental aspects of our work this year, wealth inequality. But as you'll see from the presentation from Jonathan and Mike, this goes beyond a strict lens of opportunities for returning citizens. It really goes to anyone that is traditionally excluded from the workforce, whether by virtue of disability, immigration, experience of homelessness, or other characteristics. As to the business case, as oftentimes that is one angle to get the investors to pay attention to this, there's a clear human capital management aspect to this. You might have seen the New York Times article that came with a webinar invite around the tightening labor market and how that has increased the employment of citizens with a criminal record in some cases. But more broadly, thinking of it as a really big untapped pool of talent, right? 70 million people in the United States, an ungodly figure, who have a criminal record. That is a big full of people that ought to be in a position to contribute to American society, to the American economy, and that are being left behind. And as again, I think Jonathan and Mike will show, there is an element of search and hiring costs that are associated with more traditional hiring practices. There is exposure around legal and compliance issues. And at the systemic level, if you think, well, unless we provide meaningful opportunities for individuals to enter the labor force on fair terms, there will be a drain on public resources. There will be a drain on the opportunity for people to perform and find meaning through work, if that's what they see in life. And systemically, there is this inherent risk, coming from increasing wealth inequality and increasing drain on public resources. So now that as we turn it over to Mike and Jonathan, what are the quick entry points here for investors? Well, there is, as always, the engagement with managers. It's a similar strategy to our past analysis with respect to job quality standards and job quality strategies in private debt and private equity, right? Can you make an argument to your managers around Can you make an argument to your managers around how they should be thinking about the future of work? The opportunities for employment, lifting up the business case again, if that's what you think they will be mainly responding to. There are several opportunities around shareholder engagement. There are initiatives there that I know Pat Tomaino at Zevin and some of their colleagues have been pursuing with Amazon, with Pepsi, and with Walmart, going both to disclosure to implementation of best practices and the like. And lastly, the initiatives around, at the policy level, around issues such as ban the box. On the direct part, that's where we get to Greystone. You can invest in companies that practice inclusive hiring, and you can invest in the initiatives that support the adoption of inclusive hiring practices, which ranges from more philanthropic approaches, alternative staffing organizations, such as the work that our friends at the ICA group have been doing, job boards that facilitate the hiring of people that have been previously excluded. And finally, and that's where we get to the main presentation, the work that Greystone has been doing around open hiring within Greystone itself, and the Center for Open Hiring that is meant to facilitate the growth of open hiring opportunities for others. And with that, I will welcome Mike and Jonathan. Jonathan, I'm turning over the comments to you. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. I'm delighted to have you here and to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and we're happy to tell the Greystone story and share it with you. I'm going to start us, and then I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, Mike Brady, in a couple of minutes. But in addition to you, your team, I want to thank Andrea, and I want to thank the folks that are on the call for their interest and attention. And it's really nice of you, Andrea, to have arranged for that Larry Fink statement to come out, where he's essentially supporting in words what Greystone has been practicing for 35 years. So really, thank you very much for that. That was quite timely. But yes, I think some enthusiasm and some caution, as you say, is both reactions are warranted. So some of the folks on this call may be quite familiar with Greystone, others not familiar at all. And perhaps some of you may have had experience of Greystone, but don't even know it. So by the end of the call, hopefully everybody will be familiar. I'll circle back to that comment in a minute. But our plan for the next little while here is I'm going to sort of set the frame, tell a little bit of the story about where Greystone has come from, where Greystone is and what we're doing now, and then a little bit of a preview for where we're going. And then I will turn it over to Mike to talk a bit more about the resourcing of those activities and to provide some additional precision and commentary around that. We have a a long history at Grayston. We do not have a long series of slides, so we're going to talk through each of the slides, and we're going to put, if you will, seeds out there that if people want to pick up on them and come back in questions and discussion, we'd really welcome that, because we really want this to be a dialogue in addition to a presentation. So to capture the first core of the story. So Grayston is New York State's first registered benefit corporation. As I'm sure most everybody on this call knows, we therefore have to have a mission that we take as seriously as we do our fiduciary responsibilities, and that is open hiring. So let me tell you what open hiring is. So open hiring means that if you want a job at Grayston, you put your name on a list, you put your cell phone number on the list. When a job becomes available and you're the next name on the list, you get a phone call. If you answer the phone and if you show up, you have a job. Period. Full stop. No questions asked. No background checks, no references, no CVs, nothing. That's a rather radical and a rather simple notion. Grayston has been doing that for 35 years, and we produce about 35,000 pounds of brownies every day using that process. So if you've had, for example, Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie ice cream, even if you didn't know it, that was a Grayston brownie. So even if you didn't think you were familiar with Grayston, perhaps you have had an experience of what Grayston produces. So we run 2 shifts, 24/7, 6 days a week, producing brownies both for Ben & Jerry's, but also for online sales, for Whole Foods Market, and that's the core of or the platform, I should say, of the Grayston story. So the product line, just so people have a sense of what we're doing, is brownies and blondies and cookies, etc. But it is a transformative model for how to bring people into the mainstream workforce who have been systemically excluded. It's around equity. It's, as one can imagine, and I don't think we need to belabor the point with this group, around social justice. It is, as the title indicates here, it's a core, profound business innovation, doing hiring fundamentally differently as a means of driving social inclusion. So it marries those two things at its core. And there is, as you alluded to this, Andrea, but I think it's worth emphasizing, there's a role for everybody on this call and elsewhere, obviously, to play, which is maybe a company that is an investment could do open hiring. Maybe there's a different kind of dialogue one can have with fund managers. There's a whole series of things that people can do to become involved in the search for new ways to drive inclusion, and that we'll come to some of those. And you mentioned a couple of them already, Andrea, so I'm not going to repeat that. So the core here, right, is Grayston, it's important to remember, is a business. It's not a program, although there are some programmatic elements. We're a world-class bakery producing within the Unilever global ecosystem at that level, and the kinds of issues that are being addressed through the business activity are, as Andrea, you mentioned, crime, mass incarceration, 700,000 people returning from prisons every year. But I want to put a note here, importantly, that the open hiring model at Grayston is not directed at any one specific excluded population. It's directed at all, right? So it's at that level. You could be homeless and come to Grayston, put your name on the list. All kinds of different people who have been systemically excluded, not just returning citizens who have been in prison. The background and why we talk about open hiring as a mechanism for thriving communities is our founder, Bernie Glassman, coined this phrase as he began this process of open hiring. The notion that we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. So it's not so much about the brownies, although it's certainly nice that we make brownies rather than widgets, but this can be applied in lots of different sectors. And there is in this a spiritual base that is historic and current for Grayston, which is the Buddhist notion of non-judgment. right? So Grayston, as a business, we measure, we track, we have KPIs, we have expectations and training and et cetera for people, but we assess their performance on the job now, not looking at what they might have done in the past, right? So that's the core concept of non-judgment. So part of the notion, another way we describe this, is creating the opportunity for people to experience the dignity of work. Right? So people are given the chance, and then there is this development of a kind of camaraderie and a kind of teamwork and an intensity of success that we think is really special, really powerful for business, a real competitive advantage in the marketplace. We can dig deeper into that. But to a certain extent, every baker who works on the production floor, who's an open hiring employee, wears their own HR hat, right? Because it's critical for them that it work and that the person next to them work and that the whole system therefore hangs together. There's also a ripple effect beyond the baker and the person who's actually making the brownies with their hands in the flour and whatnot. If you think about the calculus of, so a person has an opportunity to experience the dignity of work. That person has a partner, a spouse. They have maybe a child. They have parents or grandparents, right? You can see quickly, I don't need to keep going, but the ripple effect outward into community from that personal transformation through an organization that is transformative can transform a community. So that ripple effect is pretty straightforward to see. Let me share a couple of sort of data points, and we can circle back to some of these if interesting. So person gets the call, they show up, they start an apprenticeship program that day. That's their first day of work. About 40% of folks that try it, after about 3 months, they drop out. Thereafter, almost 80%, 77% folks complete the apprenticeship program, right? So we can talk about why that happens, and we have a lot of ideas about that, right? Average tenure today on the team is about 44 months. We have one person on the team that's been with Grayston more than 20 years. The bulk are in the 5 to 20 year range. You mentioned the onboarding costs, Andrea. I want to put that out there for people to think about. So SHRM estimates it's about $4,000 to bring a first person on full time. We do it at, give or take, half of that. Okay, and again, just to capture for folks the thought behind that, and that's that we invest to bring people in rather than spend to screen them out. Okay. So this is just a simple timeline of the sort of the Grayston story. I'm not going to read it to you, but I know that there are some people that may be on the phone rather than actually able to see the slides. So I'm going to pull out a couple of highlights, starting with the founding. And Grayston was, and Bernie Glassman was really quite ahead of his time. And our goal is to sort of stay ahead of our time and keep driving. I don't know if somebody maybe needs to mute their phone. Thank you. To stay ahead of the curve and drive change through innovation. The relationship with Ben and Jerry's really speaks back to the Larry Fink comment in all seriousness, which is that purpose-driven companies and mission-driven companies, I think the evidence is increasingly clear about the competitive advantage that comes from that. There's also a lot of change, and this community is certainly involved in it, those folks on this call, in terms of hybrid organizations, hybrid social enterprises. So Grayston is very much that. In the commercial enterprise, the bakery is owned by a nonprofit organization. Okay, so that we are a true hybrid, structural hybrid. In terms of the scale, right? I mentioned the hours and whatnot, but it's this is a local Yonkers-based operation, but it's at an industrial scale, right? So it's a tractor trailer load of brownies every day. So that's the nature of the work. So as people are working in that environment up in Yonkers in the plant, one of the things that becomes clear is that the folks who come to Grayston through open hiring have a set of needs to be able not just to get the job, but to succeed on the job. And that's critical, right? Because it's about transformation that's durable, not one-off. So just the same way all of us on this call who don't necessarily have the positions we have through open hiring, we need to know where our kids are. We need to know where we're going to get our next meal. We need to know that we have a roof over our heads, et cetera. So there is around the core of the bakery business a set of community programs designed to help the bakers succeed at job and at life. And they are designed for both our community and our bakers, but they are similar to all of the kinds of programmatic supports that we all rely on ourselves. And one important caveat, because I know there are people from the West Coast, there are people maybe from rural areas that are investing in companies in rural areas as well as urban areas. The nature of the community programs are flexible by design. It's not one size fits all. For example, we're in an urban area, but we've talked to a lot of companies that are looking into open hiring and how it might work in their operations who are in rural areas. So one kind of community program that might be appropriate for other companies would be a transportation. How do people get to the plant if they don't have a car? And so there are other structural barriers that we don't address in our model in Yonkers, but that could well be addressed within the same conceptual framework. Okay, as we sort of walk up this curve a little bit, so the notion of being a benefit corporation, being a B Corp, being part of B Lab. You mentioned the Stern School, Andrea. So Grayston also, as part of its effort to replicate and scale and share knowledge, also has a variety of partnerships with Conscious Capitalism, with NYU Stern, with Prime in terms of educating the next generation, et cetera. We can, again, drill down further into that. The 35th Anniversary Gala, right, which was a celebration of business innovation and social inclusion, honored Ben and Jerry, the two people, not so much the company, but the two people for what they offered and have created and continue to sort of offer the world. And it was a 35-year celebration of what has passed, but in many ways it was also a celebration of the next 35 years and what we're going to be doing over that next 35 years. So as we move forward into that next phase of work, we're pretty conscious at Grayston of staying clear and true to our core purpose of thriving communities via open hiring. So, whether we have a baker's hat on, we think of ourselves as being in the food sector, we look at ourselves as a social justice advocacy organization, as a community, as a force for community development, as social entrepreneurs, all of which we do, we keep in mind that it's about systems level transformation, that's what we're about, and changing things at a root cause level such that we can have a more equitable, more just world. I want to point out a couple of parallels I think might be interesting particularly for this community, because when Bernie Glassman started talking about open hiring and having no background checks, no references, which hire people as they come to the door, people thought that was pretty quirky, to say the least. If you look back though and think about when Grohol and Brundtland or coining the phrase sustainability, or when John Elkington coining the phrase the triple bottom line, these things were looked at as pretty marginal as well. But as people discovered that you could take the notion of sustainability as a lens and look around a corporation and find all kinds of ways of making more profit and cutting and sharing savings on costs, that created a whole kind of new momentum around sustainability. Similarly, climate change has, I think, now become understood as a key indicator of executive level capacity to see trends and manage risks in different ways, where the risks aren't fully calculable, they're long-term, but they're potentially enormous. So I would posit, and we can talk more about this, and you framed it a little bit already, Andrea, that how we hire people and the whole question of are we able to innovate in that space around human capital management could be the touchstone for this next 10, 20, 30 years of corporate level leadership and whether or not leaders are ready to manage this level of challenge. So what are we doing to try and move all of that forward? Here's a simple articulation of that. right? So we're already running a bakery 24/7. Like we can't run it 6 days a week. Can't run it 25 hours a day, right? That's not going to work. We are putting up a plant in the EU, so we are scaling in that regard. But we are also realizing that we can't just make more brownies. We have to replicate and teach other companies how to do open hiring and make it possible for them to become early adopters of open hiring. I won't go through a whole list of the business case and the business benefits for open hiring. You ticked off a couple, Andrea, but in terms of attracting and keeping millennial talent is part of it, building brand value, the whole question of purpose, those are among the other things. And we have inbound interest from all different kinds of folks. So you can see on the schematic here, or for those that can't see it actually, so there's 3 parts of the Center for Open Hiring at Grayston, which is our collaborative learning space to show others how to do this. That there's research and programs as one element, education and training is a second, and consulting is a third. I'm not going to run through the research and programs because we've talked some about those already, but you know, executive education is key because one needs that leadership support. The immersion classes are necessary because people learn different ways. Not everybody's a book learner or a visual learner or an auditory learner. Employee swaps is something that lets companies really experience the person who's gone through open hiring. It's not an abstract concept. It's not a paper about someone. It's the actual experience of being at Grayston or Grayston folks coming to other places. The roundtables, I think, self-explanatory in terms of sharing and changing and driving and designing a conversation that's different. Consulting pieces in terms of the pilot programs, in terms of consulting support and onboarding guidelines, you know, we think we have a lot to learn still at Grayston, but we also think after 35 years, we've got a fair bit that we can share, want to share, and that will make it easier for companies to adopt open hiring. And everybody's going to make mistakes, but they'll make maybe different ones, or we can help mitigate the risk of making mistakes and running into problems based on our experience. So that's a reasonably quick pass-through of the open hiring Grayston story of what we've been doing, what we are doing, and what we want to be doing next. So I'm going to pass it off to Mike in a minute, but just a reminder that it is about the people. It is about sort of human capital, and if we think about how we do HR now and how we've done HR 3 decades ago, it's a space that's really ripe for disruption to drive the kind of social change that I think this community is trying to do. And if we're going to change the world around us, we have to change our practices and our behaviors and be the folks that drive that change. So that's a start, and I'll let Mike take it from here, and I'll click on the next slide, and then Andrea, let Mike have at it.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Over to you, Mike. Oh, hold up.
Sorry about that. Here we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, good. So I was just wanted to echo what Jonathan said, which was to thank you, Andrea, for the opportunity to talk more about Grayston and really what we see as some fundamental challenges in the economy that we believe open hiring addresses, but also I want to leave some time, if possible, to hear from the folks on the call around how do we crack this with some, innovative financing options. And a very brief background, I joined Grayston initially as the president of the bakery, and the inbound interest in helping other organizations to adopt the model of open hiring was frankly overwhelming, but also really engaging. And I was working to get brownies out the door for Unilever, but my real passion was to try to understand how we could scale this model. And I've taken that to now lead the nonprofit part of our hybrid organization and work on this Center for Open Hiring. And as we've done it, we've tried to position and understand in the market where we stand, and that's we've kind of put these statistics on the screen together. But once we started getting into a $72 billion number that is spent on screening people out and on the ideas of background checks and reference checks that have become kind of the core aspects of a human capital strategy that really are not serving businesses, if we can just move a basis point from that into a model like open hiring or into thinking about inclusive hiring within a human capital strategy that might be a variant of open hiring, I think there's tremendous opportunity for our organization, but for a number of different organizations that want to engage with kind of the progressive business leader. And so we've constantly now, and I think something that I've brought to Grayston that may not have been here before, is been trying to uncover the business value of doing things like an inclusive hiring model, where you're getting access to an employee base that previously was screened out of your business, but could actually be a contributing member while you're creating a culture of inclusiveness. You're building mindfulness within your community that you're trying to contribute in a positive way. So all of that goes into it, recognizing also that it's cheaper. If you take away the 20 interviews and the onboarding costs and just take the next person in line, admittedly there's some friction in the process, but you can gain so much more by being much more open to a different way of onboarding people. One of the things not on this slide, which I think is an important figure from an impact investing standpoint, is we've recently concluded an SROI analysis with Yale. And every dollar that we put into open hiring, Yale's analysis came out to roughly $9 and change of value in the community. So our ability to employ team members that may otherwise not be employed in a community like Southwest Yonkers creates great value back into the community. And it's that kind of further analysis that we'd like to do to make people aware that open hiring is good for business, it's great for the community, and now our challenge is how do we scale it? How do we kind of bring this awareness to people? Do I have control of the slides, or?
Yes, you should.
Can I just tell you to change it?
I can do that.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend much time on it. The next slide, we get into kind of talks to the scale that we are going to be working towards. There's a lot of different ways to make and measure these numbers, but what we're really wanting to get across with this type of communication is we need to be very metrics driven. The ability to give someone a job, as Jonathan was alluding to, is important to us, but as we go through refining and building on our learnings with open hiring, we're doing things that say, okay, the team member at the bakery that's just gotten a job, they may have 2 kids in the Yonkers Public School District. If those kids are struggling to be better off in their lives, and Grayston as an entity is not reaching out to the community to do what we can to make them more effective, are we making the most of our opportunity with our new team member? And so how can we come at open hiring with that multi-generational lens that says not only do we want to help the team member at the bakery, but we want to positively impact those other family members or stakeholders in the community related to that person. And it's not really that heavy a lift. If you think about the employee will be better off if we're also thinking about how do I give him or her the day off when there's a parent-teacher conference, so that they can then go to school and participate in their kid's parent-teacher conference, when we know that type of participation leads to, let's say 20% greater positive outcomes for the child that's involved. That's the real underpinnings of open hiring and the open hiring model, is how do we make lasting impact in the community through employment, but all the other mechanisms that we can drive. And this is where we're looking for supporters and people to help us at the Center of Open Hiring to conduct this kind of research. And like I said, I want to leave time for questions, because typically when we go through this, it brings up all sorts of ideas or concepts that people want to work with. But if you want to switch to the next slide, it just gets back to the hybrid organization. And this is part of the history of Grayston, and now I think part of our challenge, in that as a nonprofit manager, I'm now going out and looking for a sizable fundraise, either through philanthropic dollars or impact investing dollars, and we have a lot of earned revenue mechanisms. But frankly, we're tied to a bakery that I've also recently run that has quite a positive future aligned with it. So how do I demonstrate the proper amount of need and interact between the nonprofit and the for-profit to bring the greatest value to our investors or stakeholders or future donors in a way that's not overly unique that we can't convince people to get engaged? So the next slide then just talks a bit of the track record. I'm quite proud of the work that we've been doing, the recent growth. Ben & Jerry's has been a tremendous partner. They've been challenging us. Jonathan alluded to the Whole Foods relationship. We've got a brownie on Delta Airlines. Our ability to sell and build a business off of our story around social justice is another big component. You know, I spend a lot of time going to business schools talking about making sure future business leaders are considering what social innovation and social justice can do within a strategy at a business organization. I can say without a doubt that were it not for our relationships with Ben & Jerry's and Unilever, Grayston would have never succeeded like we have. And we're going to both leverage that well into the future, but give them the amount of recognition that they need to make people aware that those relationships are invaluable. And for many years, we're just a small player in the supply chain until we've really become a kind of a core part of their sustainable living plan. The last, set of slides talks about the capital stack that we're thinking about. As we grow the bakery and as we look at the Center for Open Hiring, our nonprofit entity, how do we bring dollars to the table that will allow us to execute on this mission? There's a lot of different vehicles. One of them is something we're exploring now around an impact investing giving circle. But, certainly access to traditional philanthropic dollars is an easy way for us to ask for money. But if core to what we're doing at the Center for Open Hiring is trying to be innovative in models of employment, we also want to be innovative in the way we secure financing. And so working with those that want to be progressive is important to us. And I think the easiest thing now is perhaps just to take questions, Andrea, or if you have specific things you'd like me to poke into more from the slides, I'm happy to do that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike, and thank you also, Jonathan. I have a couple of questions that have come in through the chat function. I would encourage those that have joined us via WebEx to put their questions in the chat. And I can also unmute the ones on the phone afterwards to see if there are questions from them. And then I'll take the prerogative to ask a couple of things myself. One question was precisely on the issue of replication and scaling, as you both were hinting at. There's only so many brownies that we can eat, but through the relationship with Unilever, the person asking was saying it might be possible to spread the model throughout this multinational company. Have there been some attempts to promote open hiring there? And if so, how could other companies try to influence upstream towards the top of the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben & Jerry's did a pilot project this year, and they have what they're referring to as a values-led hiring model, inspired by open hiring, where they're giving people opportunities to work in their 2 plants in Vermont. We're very much engaged with Unilever in a similar model throughout North America, and we're excited that future announcements are pending around their commitment to this. And it happened in many ways through conversation that Ben & Jerry's wanted us to inspire other suppliers in their network to do open hiring. And then the recognition that if they didn't do it themselves, they really didn't have the street cred, if you will, to encourage their other suppliers to do it. So they're very much behind it, and perhaps it wasn't clear in our presentation, but that's the entire purpose of the center, is to allow other organizations to learn from what we do, like a Unilever or any of the other multinationals, And unlike Grayston, where our entire workforce is open hiring driven, what we're encouraging leaders to do is to identify the one job or the 1% of their workforce that they could be more progressive on. And we've seen time and again now, and Larry Fink is another example of leaders calling each other out or standing up for their organizations and saying, hey, we're going to be more socially just. We're going to give fair chance employment opportunities. We're going to do these types of things. But they get hung up in the how, and the Center for Open Hiring is the how that's going to hold these people's feet to the fire, if you will, to say this is the way you can do it, and we want you to take a stance on bringing people in and giving people a chance.
Andrea?
Jonathan?
I'm just going to pick up on one of the things that Mike mentioned, which is that, Ben & Jerry's and Unilever have been phenomenal partners for Grayston. I also think that Grayston and what Grayston has been able to demonstrate year in and year out as a supplier to Ben & Jerry's has broadened the thinking at the top at both Ben & Jerry's and Unilever in terms of what might have been unimaginable has been being done now for years and years. So I think there's a really healthy two-way street in terms of Grayston driving change at Ben & Jerry and Unilever, and Ben & Jerry and Unilever being phenomenal partners in support of this new way of doing things. The other thing I was just going to add, because it came up, but maybe a little bit obliquely, is that there is this, and it's this notion of transformation, which Andrea, you and your network, I'm sure, are quite thoughtful and have thought a lot about. But if you imagine the movement that is happening when someone has nothing and then they have something. So going from 0 to 1 is really a phenomenal transformation as a personal journey. So no job and no chance of a job. It's really, it's not just, it's a change of state, right? So in a sort of from an ecological or a chemical science perspective, it's like the difference between water and steam, right? They're completely different realities. So the nature of open hiring is that it does drive transformation starting at that very basic level of personal, organizational, institutional, community, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Well, there's so much that's interesting to unpack there, and in part, I'm thinking of it also as a transformation strategy, as a theory of change, right? What can little scrappy organizations such as our investor network, or for that matter Grayston, within the context of the broad economy, do in terms of setting these examples and influencing the broader players. And even that in some ways goes back to the earlier Blackrock, Larry Fink piece, right? We do this small proofs of concept, and then we need to find the pathways. And that's why I thought that question about the influencing Unilever was especially interesting there. One thing that I'll pick up on, Jonathan, on what you just said about the difference between 0 and 1, no opportunity versus opportunity. It's of especial interest to me because oftentimes we have looked at this issue of quality jobs and say palliative improvement, right? You get a lot of impact investors that say, oh, there's somebody making $2 a day. If we get them to $2.20, that's a 10% improvement. But it still kind of sucks compared to a lot of the people that are a lot better off than that, even though the numbers are different. And I imagine that the theory around open hiring with that is, well, you're really going from 0, so it is a drastic change, right? It's not that by making $15 an hour, or I don't know what the entry wage is at Grayston, we're going to create parity in the world, but at least it is going that way. So how are you all thinking about the palliative versus the kind of transformative aspect in that sense? And maybe that ties into that 1% piece that Mike was mentioning, right? Even if companies change open hiring for 1%, are there pathways for the employees that come in through open hiring to be internally promoted? Do they go on to higher level jobs, even in other companies after they leave Grayston? Do you have any? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
maybe I'll take a first answer at that. Is that all right? And then Mike can add more details, because as he said, before being CEO of Grayston as a whole, he was president of the bakery. So the answer to the question of do people move on is absolutely, and there are pathways. So a couple thoughts on that. Note, though, that I don't say graduate, because it's also okay to stay with your job at Grayston and continue to bake. So it's not like you failed to graduate if you don't leave Grayston. So we talk about ambassadors leaving rather than graduates. So there is something called path making, which we didn't have time to talk about, but happy to share a little bit more about, because it's right to this point, Andrea. So path making is a collaboration. It's central to open hiring, but the way we have structured it most recently is a collaboration with a community service organization in Yonkers, such that we have a caseworker at the plant on site to help people with issues of, could be a CV, it could be of opening a bank account, it could be a problem in their family, whatever issues might come up for folks. But we want them to be able to do their jobs well, focus on their work, and that means they need to have support to address other problems as well. So that's one mechanism for helping people move forward. The other is that it dovetails with our whole workforce development program, which is a training program, and we have culinary arts, and we have security and janitorial, a bunch of different things at different times to meet the needs in the community where the jobs actually are. But so yeah, there's a list actually that I was just looking at recently, in terms of places like whether it's cooking at BGR, or whether it's Home Depot, or whether it's other companies more or less well known. But yeah, folks come through the Grayston model and go onward out of that model into other jobs. And part of what, and your point is well taken about 0 to 1. If 1 still is terrible and you really need to get to 6 to survive, 1's not so great. But the point though of why I said that change of state is that because not everybody is going to be doing open hiring right away, but the person who's gone to Grayston and maybe only has worked at 6 months at Grayston, didn't work out for whatever reason, they now have something to put on a CV for the next possible employer that is going to request a CV, right? So that does fundamentally change their ability to navigate in our world, even as we're trying to change that world.
Yeah, I want to make the one comment on the 0 to 1, and when people start, and the essence of open hiring in our community of Yonkers is it provides hope, where in other communities there is no hope for too many people. And the hope is that if you commit to waiting until your opportunity to come off the job list, you'll get that chance. And that's a massive transformation. And what we'd like to do through our work, and I love the way you referred to us, because I think we are just that scrappy little guy that can maybe make real impact, is try to make people understand how important that hope is, just by creating 1 or 2 jobs in your organization that can give people something to look forward to, that in too many communities there isn't that out there.
Terrific. And another quick thing to bring in on the investment side, thinking from the limited dollars that are probably where any investor will make outsized returns on something like this. It is fundamentally predicated on the impact thesis there. It seems like investing through this open hiring circle would be more catalytic in terms of the impact they can create versus investing directly within an entity that does open hiring. Is that a correct understanding as you view the impact thesis for the center?
I mean, I would envision the impact investing circle essentially identifies the organizations that will be doing the open hiring, and those investments will go as the catalyst and kind of the spark to encourage organizations to do open hiring. But the investments in those organizations can take a lot of different forms, but allow them to grow and create more jobs in their entities.
Great. One change of pace, and then, Jonathan, feel free to add or elaborate on this, or if you have your own questions that you wish had been asked. I think it was Mike that cited a statistic of $1 going into open hiring, creating $9 of wealth within the community, or maybe it was Jonathan, forgive me for the misattribution. But still, it's a very significant number in terms of the benefit created for a place, especially a place like Yonkers, right? Or if you take a place-based approach where this distributed value creation really matters. Has there been an effort around creating tax incentives for companies that do open hiring, or, God forbid, I'm heard mentioning social impact bonds, but it seems like to the extent that you can tie your work to reducing some costs for a municipality in the provision of services or otherwise, right? It seems like there are a couple of opportunities around that, and the question was wondering, if you have explored that.
We're anxious to explore it. One of the slides we had already presented, there is a work opportunity tax credit that's already available to businesses. Businesses that take on a team member that is formerly incarcerated, a veteran, people that have dealt with poverty. There's roughly $2,400 per qualified employee if you're able to bring one of those team members on. So there's money out there already if an organization wants to be progressive. I think it's particularly attractive to smaller businesses that are asking themselves, how do they become more, or what's the value to them of bringing on a more inclusive workforce? Well, there's these tax credits out there. We would love to begin to work with a private partnership in Yonkers to drive further tax credits to new businesses that are doing development in this community that would be progressive around open hiring. I think there's tremendous ground there to cover.
Let me just, if I can, Andrea, build on that a little bit with a little bit of a risk lens. Can you hear me? Yeah. So to build on that, thinking a little bit about risk. Right. So there's more and more research around whether you're looking at sort of D&I and whether does diversity and inclusion really help a company. If you're looking at purpose, if you're looking at attributes of brand value, I think there's ever more evidence that if it's durable and if you give it enough time, those things have significant impact in terms of profitability, in terms of ROI, et cetera. If you give it enough time, though, is a key phrase, right? Short-term versus long-term or mid-term. So one of the things that the center is designed to help other companies and other thought leaders grapple with is, what does it take, and what's, Mike mentioned sort of what does the mixed cap stack look like, but what's the appropriate way to share risk and return when there is some risk, where there are public policy goals being met through business innovation, right? What's the role of the investor? What's the role of the government entity? And what's the role, of a company? So working through how to share that risk and return appropriately, is something that Grayson spent a lot of time working on. We've begun to do some convenings around that at the center. We want to do more of those because clearly if one can refine that equation, the potential for all players to win in the timeframes that they need is huge.
Yeah, and that I think goes back to the intersection that has been well explored by this group and beyond on between quality jobs, the business case for quality jobs, and long-termism, right? The need for taking a much more long-term approach to the investment. And I think that the tax advantage that Mike was bringing up was one of the opportunities for, in the short term, creating the incentive, and then in the long term, the entity would be reaping the returns from this. And I see that Delilah Rothenberg from Pegasus put in a bunch of really good questions there. If you see them, Mike and Jonathan, if you want to address any or all of them in turn under the chat function.
I definitely do want to address them. I have to read them first, though, so hang on a second.
Yeah, these are all great questions, and the work that we're doing as we bring more organizations on board with this concept. You know, one of the key challenges when we approach organizations is to help them understand what open hiring may be in their organization. And so as we did this with Ben & Jerry's, you know, they didn't adopt exactly what we did. They had to think, you know, where within their values as an organization would they like to create an inclusive hiring model, and then how do they communicate that out into an organization and a community that is already really wanting a job. So they might have a job opening that someone that's worked at Ben & Jerry's for years wants to have, and now they're going to give it to someone with a barrier or that had faced barriers to employment in the past. You know, they have to explain why they're doing that. A lot of that communication is key, we think, in the early stages for a successful implementation. You know, the profitability metrics come in a variety of levers. Like we said, giving someone an opportunity to start at an open hiring and move in a pathway forward. That starting position may not have to be paid at the same level as where they would be in 6 months or a year afterwards. And you could use those dollars to improve on the trainings, but you've just saved on all the onboarding costs around the recruitment process. So it's depending on where the organization wants to make and measure their profitability. I think there's a lot of different levers that we can pull. The part where Unilever and Ben & Jerry's is very engaged is by having a diverse workforce with their manufacturing team members. Does that allow them to attract more progressive millennials at their executive levels? And how do they interact all of those pieces together? The market data questions, we've got a number of different things we're working on. The SROI numbers I spoke of earlier, Yale is going to release that in advance of the formal launch of our center later in the spring. The sample sizes are quite small. You know, admittedly, Grayson's work has been going on for 35 years, and now we're working with the most progressive organizations, and we honestly appreciate that we're going to have to build the sample size up until we have real numbers in the thousands that people can look at and say, yeah, this is clearly a model that works. But what we're banking on is that an organization that wants to be progressive can find those 1 or 2 jobs to start, and that we can inspire those organizations and manage the risk that Jonathan talked about. I think the cost per employee breakdown Jonathan got into, it's relatively, and if this is onboarding, you know, we talk about $4,500 on average in the U.S. for onboarding a new employee. Ours is about $2,000. The ongoing costs are no different in our measurement than they would be at any organization.
Just to pick up
we don't screen anyone out. So the last one is the key part, and where we like to kind of emphasize is there's so much bias inherent in a lot of human capital strategies that our model where you screen no one out, with the exception, and so I have to say you have to have an I-9. You know, you need to be able to work legally in the U.S. But other than that, we give everyone the chance. And that's core to what we see as the kind of the simplicity but the quite radical nature of open hiring.
Just to pick up on a couple threads, and it is a good package of questions. In terms of the key challenges, I would say that it's really mindset, which is why part of what we're offering at the Center for Open Hiring is exposure through classes, through meeting people, through employee swaps, et cetera. Because once so mindset, I would say, is in some ways the key challenge. And I think the opportunity presents itself and kind of makes its own case once you have a proof point. So that's why we're always encouraging people to actually come see Grayston in operation, working as a world-class bakery. It's not a theory. It's a proven practice over decades. And once people see that and their mind is open to, wow, like that actually works, then you begin to see how it can be implemented at different kinds of companies in different sectors, different shapes and sizes. The screening people out, Mike addressed. I mean, Grayston's model is sort of profoundly simple, which is, if you can do the work, do the work. We're happy to have you. If you can't do the work because you're dropping bags of flour or you're, spilling the butter and the oil or the cocoa, whatever, then you're eventually going to get fired. So it's not this program idea, but again, it's encouraging people in hiring positions, in HR, investors who can ask questions, to pose questions about why are certain restrictions put into job descriptions? Why are we requiring high school diplomas, college preferred? Is that really a requirement of the job or not? So there are threads throughout the open hiring, human capital management tapestry that can be pulled in a lot of different directions to draw more attention to the issue and to then get exposure so people come to understand what is it we're really about and how we can really bring people in who otherwise would never have a chance.
Yeah, and so the one kind of statistic there that Jonathan brought up, which is a good one, and if there are human capital specialists on the call, they'll know this, but by putting that kind of language into a job description to screen out people that don't have a high school diploma, you've significantly reduced the likelihood that you're going to bring a man or a woman of color into your workforce, when actually a high school diploma is not what you're screening for. You just need to know that someone can read or someone's capable of responding to their manager, which doesn't always necessarily come with a high school diploma either. So it's the reference that says, what are you actually trying to achieve through your onboarding and your recruiting process that might actually prevent you from finding the right kind of team member.
Hey, one question that goes a little bit beyond the scope of this, but maybe you two will entertain it. What are some of the practices that you all have? What are some of the best practices that you can share with investors around more inclusive hiring beyond this? So I imagine the references to ban the box, to disclosure by big companies. Is there anything else that, as practitioners that are very much in the world of more inclusive hiring, you can recommend beyond open hiring for investors that might be public equities investors or otherwise?
Jonathan, I'll give you a minute to think about it as I'll take it on, but, we don't get asked that all that often. The honest answer around the way we do our work, we haven't seen others doing it similar to us, and now, we're looking to scale this model. That's the challenge. I just spent a lot of time with Sean Dove, who works for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. Very much supportive of black-owned businesses and venture capital work that goes into minority-owned businesses. He and I talk a lot about social enterprise and the failure rate of businesses. The difference with what we're trying to do at Grayston is inspire job creation at already successful businesses and putting impact investment dollars towards businesses that have already shown staying power, that want to grow, and how can you kind of infuse a social justice model or a social enterprise model into those. But the work at so we're doing something with MBK Yonkers, which is trying to be very progressive around employment and ensuring we're overcoming the systematic changes in communities. So I look at my brother's keeper. It's not really an impact investing model, but they're trying to strive towards more progressive things. Jonathan, I hope maybe I gave you a minute.
Let me try to reframe the question in a different way, perhaps. Let's imagine that one of the folks that is calling in, whose name we don't see, is actually Larry Fink, and he says, okay, love what you're saying. Here's the $27 million that you all are looking for. What can I do with my other $1 billion that would advance this general social change strategy? It was more at that level, right? Beyond the direct investment, are there any best practices, perhaps, that can be applied across asset classes?
Yeah. So if you could arrange the call, we'd love to actually have that discussion. But that's a really good question, Andrea. So part of the answer, right, on the fly here is every publicly traded company ought be reviewing from the lens of social justice and from the lens of long-term profitability its methods for hiring people. What does it say on the website? What are the exclusionary tropes that are just built into the system that nobody has thought to try and take out, right? So the beauty and the profoundness of open hiring is that we're not saying, well, if you've done this, then maybe not. If it's been 3 years and you've been clean, then we're not, So open is just open, right? So it's not kind of cherry picking one plank of the fence to take down. It just says no fence, right? Now, for a publicly traded large multinational company, you may need to do some sort of careful looking first, rather than just pull down the fence, right? It's part of the DNA of Grayson. It's not for everybody else. So that kind of very active sort of review and an inventory of open hiring practices, of hiring practices through the lens of social justice and long-term profitability would be one piece. The other piece would be, again, around this risk notion of pooling, whether it's Blackrock or anybody else, getting a set of companies that are maybe part of a single supply chain to band together and figure out how to create an ecosystem that is, transformative financially, that has some maybe philanthropic role, has some public policy role, but that where there is a commitment durable over time and there's money to back it up, and maybe the hurdle rates need to be a little bit lower, or you need to have an extended time frame or whatever, to be able to sort of push this innovation and give it time to work. That's the kind of place where the Blackrocks of the world could put some money on the table and give it a slightly different, the barrier can be slightly different to their return and the timetable for the return. Great.
Thank you. And going back to that original piece, right, the direct investment, can you, Mike, tell us a little bit more about what the type of capital that you're looking for is like, or where would interested investors go to? Or Jonathan?
Absolutely. We've got quite a mixed request, but we're essentially looking for a $13 million number, roughly. Half of it to do team building and capacity building within the entity, to roll out the 3 different pieces of what the Center for Open Hiring will do. So as a reminder, Jonathan talked about them: the consulting aspect, the research and services of our actual model, and then the training and education. We've got a number of pilots underway that we can demonstrate our work. We think there's incredible interest in all of those services, and with an investment will become sustainable. Half of the investment is also to do capital improvements on the location. So we haven't talked much about it, but there is a physical location of the center, which is a roughly 30,000 square foot space that housed our nonprofit programs at Grayston. That includes an 1855-year-old mansion, which is a beautiful space. We think it can attract the world-class organizations to it, to learn, to engage, to create the right environment but we need to upgrade the space. The impact investing opportunities in both of those, in the long term, we think the work of the Center for Open Hiring can be I referenced a break-even opportunity by 2020. I think there's a ton of opportunity for us to be significantly revenue positive in the future. And then the asset value of the actual physical building, there's a real estate component to that. There is a long-term lease agreement. There's a lot of different ways we can play the impact investing component to the space, which you saw, Andrea, when you came to visit. I thank you for putting up the slide. You know, we are anxious to engage with investors on any level relative to trying to get immersed with us and trying to help us to solve how best to structure it. We found, and this is something Jonathan alluded to, that our structure is both really engaging to people, but also a challenge. You know, how do you take an organization that's already, you know, $18 million in revenue to become a $40 million organization and figure out the right levels for people to pull? It's going to take a collection of people working with us on that, and we're open to those types of conversations.
Terrific.
Jonathan,
thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, good.
No, I was just, I was only going to add in, just because for clarification purposes, that last slide that popped up, right? So again, in keeping with our Greyston sort of philosophy of collaborative learning and the hybrid model, so in addition to direct potential investments in Greyston that Mike has alluded to, you know, for folks that are also looking at, or who have an interest in figuring out ways to find and encourage other early adopters to help them manage risk that have either impact or philanthropic capital in play, we have this project that we are setting up around impact investing giving circles that is a pooled fund and that then will pre-screen potential investment targets who are early adopter companies. You know, this is not the time to go into that in detail, but that is another type of engagement mechanism that we are working to put into play collaboratively, such that, you know, again, we want to be innovative not just in terms of what we've done already the last 35, but financial innovation. And you all know this better than we do. Financial innovation is going to be key to whether we can drive innovation in terms of social justice and get businesses to be pulling in a positive direction around social justice and equity.
Terrific, thank you. And speaking of the slide, a couple of people asked if it was possible to share the deck. I imagine it's not a problem with you all?
Correct.
Great.
Totally fine. Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I think we've covered a lot. Thank you, Mike and Jonathan, for making time for this, and to everybody that joined us today. We'll be sharing the contact information as part of the deck. And hopefully you will all be interested in learning more about the Greyston work. I do encourage you to visit if you have a chance to go up to Yonkers. It is quite an incredible experience to speak to the workers there, hear directly from their experience, and see how this factory works and how it's been transformative to them. And if you want to learn more about the work of the Investor Network, if you're joining us as a guest, please feel free to reach out to us, Kurt@transformfinance.org, or visit our website, transformfinance.org. And we look forward to staying in touch with you. Congratulations on all the amazing work that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Till the next time. Take care.